Carbon capture and sequestration is gaining a lot of interest these days in the oil and gas industry because it tends to be one of the industries that's hard to decarbonize. So we're going to talk to Alfred Sorensen who's the CEO of Pieridae Energy, about a project they've got near the Caroline, Alberta, which is west of Red Deer. And welcome to the interview, Alfred.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and look forward to speaking to you about our project this afternoon.
Well, Alfred, why don't we start with an overview of this project? Because I'm fairly interested in it because a lot of the experts I've talked to said that carbon capture won't be really economic till later in the 2020s, maybe even the early 2030s. But here you are doing one in 2021. So,
well, our carbon project comes directly out of the need to find an overall carbon solution for our liquefied natural gas project on the east coast of Canada. And as a way to obtain the financing for the project is really the genesis of the carbon sequestration project. And where this project kind of comes out of, and one of the reasons we think we could be on the low cost structure of these types of projects is the fact that we're going to take advantage of a lot of the assets that we already own. So the Caroline Gas Complex sits on the West Racinas gas field, which was the original field that was discovered by Shell back in the early 80s to underpin the building of the Caroline gas plant. And it's a very large restructured that has the capability to store up to 3 million tons of carbon a year for the next 40 years. And it's the fact that we have this restructure, we have the wells that were originally drilled, we have the aiming equipment in place, that the amount of new equipment and new structure that has to be put in place is relatively small in comparison to a greenfield project, which is often what you see in all these projects. Anything that's kind of brownfield tends to be less expensive than greenfield. And so our project really is about taking advantage of what we currently own. And the reason we have the power plant on the side of it is a big part of how we bring more carbon to the story.
Now, Alfred, I'm kind of interested. You said that the project was part of the financing of your LNG project on the East Coast, the Goldboro plant. Maybe you could explain how a gas plant or a CCS project in Alberta helps with an LNG project on the East Coast.
Well, I think it's well known that large financial institutions, from private equity to private debt to regular bank debt, almost all of it today revolves around some type of ESG story. And that is really, without having the proper environmental bona fides to raise the type of capital we're talking about, it's in roughly about $10 billion project, our LNG project is, that we wouldn't be able to reach enough sources of capital that aren't constrained by ESG requirements. And so a big part of our whole story has been to, as we've been getting closer and closer to the financing, was to find a way to be carbon neutral. And that is really the kind of the reasoning behind the carbon. It wasn't that we wanted to be in the carbon sequestration business. It was a necessity in order to ensure the financing of the project was possible.
One more question, Alfred, and then we'll get on to some discussion of the specifics of the projects. I am interested in that. But I've been told by experts around the industry for the last year or two that access to capital was going to be more difficult because of ESG, especially climate risk. And if you could get it, it would be more expensive. So you've had direct experience with that, and are investors and financial institutions really cracking down, given compared to recent past?
I'd say most definitely. I think that even when you were looking at getting advisors, forget about getting to the actual money. Even the advisors now go through an ESG checklist, and you need to be able to make those minimum criteria even to kind of get onto the into the playing field, let alone on the playing field. So I think that ESG has been a big part of our story from the very beginning, whether we're talking more from the social aspects of dealing with our First Nations partners to the environmental impact of decarbonization. In both of those scenarios, it's been a very big part of Pieridae's business plan.
Now, in your press release, you talk about blue power, and so I'm assuming that you're burning natural gas to make electricity. How does that fit into the the broader CCS project?
Well, the one thing we had to do is be able to create carbon in order to store the carbon, which is kind of a strange way of saying it. But in the scenario where we are, Caroline happens to be located in an interesting part of Alberta, and that we are in the intersection of two big pipelines. So there's a lot of compressor stations run by gas-fired compressor stations that produce a significant amount of carbon. But it's not enough to offset the size of our LNG project. So that's kind of where the power plant came from, was the ability to, because of our existing infrastructure at Caroline, to build a power plant. We have good access to high voltage power lines so that we can move power into the grid very easily without having to create a new grid structure. And it's because of that power plant that we increase our carbon imprint by using natural gas to produce power, but we decrease it by storing all that carbon simultaneously. So that is how we build the credits in order to, when we look at our eastern LNG project versus what we're doing in the west. In one place, we're reducing carbon impact by earning carbon credits, and on the other side, we're incurring carbon credits, and with a view that our LNG project's roughly about a 3 million metric ton a year carbon project, but that's the amount of carbon that we'll look to sequester on the western side, so that on a national basis, we're carbon neutral.
Well, that seems to be very clever. I mean, you're displacing gas-fired electricity in Alberta, even though you are burning gas yourself, but nevertheless, and then you create credits to offset, and then your project on the East Coast, and therefore the company becomes carbon neutral. What else can you tell us about the project in terms of the amount of CO2 that you're going to be sequestering, and any other plans that you have for phase 2?
Well, so ultimately, if we look at how much carbon we're going to sequester, it's really based on the design of the LNG project. So that's really kind of where that number comes from. Where we end up ultimately is as a standalone project in Western Canada that even if for whatever reason the LNG project had to be delayed or deferred for whatever reason, we would still probably go ahead with this project, mainly because we have a very good brownfield site that ultimately would make even our production company in Alberta never carbon negative, let alone carbon neutral. And so, there's, in particular, when you look at the production of natural gas over time, if we were to do nothing and just let the price of carbon continue to increase, eventually we would go out of business because we wouldn't be able to generate enough revenue to offset the cost of producing carbon. So, even at its very basic, the carbon sequestration project gives our company longevity. And that we would, as cost of carbon continues to rise over the next from now to 2030, that this solution is a long-term solution to our carbon issue here in the province of Alberta. That the cost of carbon isn't going to go away, and so we have to come to some kind of conclusion on that. And that's really one of the other reasons why the project is important to us, because it takes the intensity of our carbon production at all three of our plants and comes up with a solution that is relatively low cost and easy to implement.
So if I were to sum up your project this way, and we'll see if you agree with me, Alfred, but you're getting pressure from investors on the ESG side. You've got the carbon tax pressure in Alberta. You build the CCS project in your Caroline gas facility and become carbon neutral. And it actually is economic and lowers emissions at the same time.
That's basically, I'd say, what we are in a nutshell. Certainly, that is the goal of the entire facility, is to bring longevity to the project by taking advantage of the cost structure that's being imposed by government on our industry.
Well, Alfred, good luck with this. It seems like a very clever approach to this, and we wish you all luck in your project.
Thanks very much, and you have a good rest of the day.